This conference will now be recorded.
This is David Wiggins from George Mason University, and I'm a member of the National Academy of Kinesiology, and I was inducted into the Academy in 2007, and I have the fellow number 483. And with me this morning is Dr. Chuck Corbin. Chuck was inducted into the National Academy of Kinesiology in 1980 and has the fellow number 267. 1980 was a pretty good year, it seems to me, because also inducted that year with Chuck were such people as Michael Ellis, Ted Baumgartner, Barbara Drinkwater, Michael Pollack, and Peter Arnold, among others. Chuck is the author, senior or sole author of more than 70 books, including Fitness for Life, Concepts of Physical Fitness, and Concepts of Fitness and Wellness. He has been the keynote speaker at more than 35 state APRIC conferences and has delivered major addresses all over the world in places like Brazil, England, Australia, Ireland, and certainly a number of other countries as well. Chuck, thanks for talking to me this morning.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Let's start out this way by asking you where were you born and raised, and discuss your early childhood experiences.
Well, I guess most people see me as a New Mexican, and I consider myself a New Mexican, but actually I was born in Toledo, Ohio, and I was there until I was 10 years old. My father was in the Navy, and when he got out, my younger brother was a baby boomer born in 1946. So my father did pay pinballs, jukeboxes, and slot machines in the local Ohio area until they outlawed pay pinballs and slot machines, and so he lost some of his investment when the federal government did that. He decided to go to law school, which took us to Tucson, Arizona, where he took some law courses in the summer of '50, and I was a young baseball player, and that was my great thing. I was a Cleveland Indian fan and had all the baseball cards and stuff. I played a little summer baseball in Tucson, and ultimately my dad gave up on this thing about being a lawyer. I think he wanted to get back at the people who took some of his investment when they outlawed what he was doing. And we ended up in Albuquerque and lived in married student housing for a year, where my dad got teacher certification. My mom already had it. They left Albuquerque and bought a ranch in Chillicothe, New Mexico, where my mom taught K through 4 and my dad 5 through 8 in a 2-room schoolhouse. And my brothers and I went to high school in a nearby town, Estancia, New Mexico, where I played all sports. There were 123 kids in the high school, so if you were a boy, you played everything. And I just loved sports and games.
Uh-huh. Well, tell me, were your mother and father, were they athletes as well?
My dad, I think, is a remnant from the Navy. He was a musician. He was actually in the United States Navy band. He pumped iron, so he was a York Barbell, Bob Hoffman kind of fan, and he had us doing weights when we were little kids and taking Bob Hoffman's high-protein supplements. He wasn't an athlete in that sense. My mom was an athlete. She was a high school basketball player, and it's interesting, back in her day, they had sports for women, but then they faded out and didn't come back in until Title IX, but she was an athlete. My dad was a fitness fanatic, I guess, and so I had kind of a combination of both.
And you said, Chuck, that you've got the one older brother?
I have an older brother who's a cowboy, a rodeo cowboy, and raises horses, and I have a younger brother who just retired as a professor of health education from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And his wife is a dance instructor there. So we have a long tradition of fitness and sports. Actually, my mom and dad did go back and get their master's degrees from the University of New Mexico in HPER, which was not their field, which is very interesting.
Right. And I know that you're married and you have a couple of kids. Am I right?
I am married. We've been married for 49 years. I have 3 boys. Charles Jr. goes by Chip, Dave, and Will. Chip is a investment computer specialist in Florida. Dave is a designer, and he's a vice president of a company and designs a store. He's worked for Gap and Guess and Seven for All Mankind, where he designs in their stores. My youngest son, our youngest son, Will, is a professor of clinical psychology. He started out as a professor at Yale, and he's associate professor here at Arizona State University now. So, yeah, we have educators in the families and cowboys and all kinds of stuff.
Very good. How did you find your way into kinesiology? I mean, was there one person or are there several folks that...
You know, I think that probably my dad's fascination with fitness and my mom's, good skills and stuff. But basically, I love sports from the day I can remember, and I played baseball, I played basketball. I continued to play noon-hour basketball here at Arizona State until I was 66. Mm-hmm. And now I've had to take up a little bit of golf. But I'd have to say probably in addition to my parents, my high school coach, who I actually keep in touch with to this day, went on to get his doctorate, but he was my basketball and baseball coach. His name is Carroll Charles. Got his PhD and writes books on classroom discipline. He was a professor at San Diego State University. I think also probably my mentor at the University of New Mexico, Armin Seidler, who was an Illinois grad, and he got me to go to Illinois to get my master's, where I took some classes with Curitin and rubbed shoulders with other graduate students like Jim Skinner and Mike Pollack and Bill Haskell. Mm-hmm. I think I had the impetus from my parents and my coach, but I think my studies at Illinois and New Mexico kind of pushed me on into what I knew I wanted to do anyway.
Uh-huh. So you took, tell me, where you took your bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees.
All right. I took my bachelor's at the University of New Mexico. I was on the baseball team. I didn't play much baseball, but I was on the baseball team, played a little freshman basketball. I taught a year of elementary PE in Albuquerque before going on to Illinois to get my master's. I did my master's at Illinois. Then I came back to the University of New Mexico for my PhD. I worked in the Peace Corps Training Center doing fitness testing and fitness programming for the South American Peace Corps volunteers. And I think that John Kennedy and, what can you do for your country and that kind of stuff also inspired me. So I think that was a unique opportunity while I was working on my doctorate to get involved in that way.
And why did you decide to make the move after you took your bachelor's degree from New Mexico? Why the University of Illinois? Was there a particular person that you wanted to work with?
Yes and no. I think more because Dr. Seidler, Armin Seidler, was the head of the department in New Mexico, and he recommended me. He was an Illinois grad. Uh-huh. He talked of the University of Illinois all the time, and so, that for us was the Mecca. That was the place to go. And I really, honestly didn't know that much about it. I mean, I graduated from college at 19, so I wasn't even 21 when I went to Illinois. I didn't turn 21 until October of that year, and so I was a pretty young New Mexico kid coming in, but got my eyes opened in, C.O. Jackson and many of the others. But the classes with Curitin and rubbing shoulders with these other graduate students was a huge influence on me at the time.
Did you actually consider staying at the University of Illinois for your PhD? Why did you decide to go back to New Mexico?
Yeah, I actually did. I actually applied to 6 different places, and I thought I wanted to go to the University of Oregon, and I remember talking to Dr. Art Esslinger about going there, and my ultimate decision not to go there was or USC or UCLA or even had a George Peabody, which is now part of Vanderbilt, were other options. As it turned out, the main reason I went back to New Mexico is because I was an in-state resident and tuition was $120 a semester, and even though the assistantship only paid $4,000, actually it left some money in my pocket, whereas the others, by the time they paid a higher stipend, but by the time you paid your tuition and room and board, it was tough. Oregon required that you have 2 years of teaching experience before you could finish, and I only had one, and that was a factor.
Yes. And at New Mexico, for your PhD, what was your area of concentration, or was it more of a generalist physical?
Well, in those days, this was prior to the specialization movement, and so it was HPERD, so we had to have health, recreation, but I don't know whether I was smart or lucky or what, but I actually took a 24-hour graduate minor in the psychology department.
Oh, interesting.
And so all of my courses in my specialty area were in psychology, and I think the greatest benefit that I got from that was the research statistics and the research design that I wouldn't have gotten in the College of Education or in the physical education department. So we had to take all the education doctoral classes, all of the physical education classes, and then I took this other one in addition, anticipating that this is the direction that things were going to go, but it wasn't something I had to do.
Right, right. Chuck, what academic positions did you hold during your career, and for what length of time?
Well, in '64, I had finished all my coursework and passed my comps, and I was ABD, and I was just married for a year and a half. We had a baby on the way, and we realized that my wife, Kathy, who was working at the time, couldn't support us both. So I took a job at St. Michael's College in Santa Fe as chair of the department. And I was, 24 years old, and I was also the soccer coach, director of intramurals. The athletic director taught some of the courses in the department. It was the two of us and some part-time instructors. After that year, I finished my dissertation, and I was making $6,000 a year. Decided the place to go out of the choices that I had was the University of Toledo.
Uh-huh.
And one of the reasons is because they were doing a thing called bioergokinetics, and it was a conceptual physical education class, which I thought was the future of physical education. I had been exposed to it with Haskell and Adams and McChrystal's book at Illinois, where they were experimenting with that. And Toledo was doing it. Perry Johnson, John Burt, who served as sort of a second mentor to me. So I was there for 2 years, but I was still only making $7,200, even with some good raises. So I almost doubled my money when I went to Texas A&M in 1967. And that was a good move because we started the concepts of physical fitness class there, and that ultimately is where I published that first Concepts of Fitness book in '68. So it's now in the 16th edition. So in those days they said that will never fly. Well, it flew.
Quite well.
From there, I was there for 4 years. I went to Kansas State University as department chair in 72, I guess. And I met up with guys like Dave Wiggins when I was there, and got to merge the women's and men's PE departments and became the de facto women's athletic director because all the coaches were members of our faculty. I kind of ran into a buzzsaw there because I had to combine the departments, get support for women's athletics, get some of the men who were coaching primarily, who were paid by us, to get into the athletic department so that our faculty could do what our faculty should be doing rather than
Right.
coaching. And I ultimately did get support for women's athletics through the athletic department, but not all of the women necessarily thought that trying to get that support was the right thing to do. It was, and it all
Right.
worked out. It was during that time that I published a little book called The Athletic Snowball with Human Kinetics, and I think it might have been the second book that Reiner and Julie ever published.
Yeah.
I know that Julie did all the typesetting and all of that stuff, and it was just a little parody on big time college athletics. And so I was there for 11 years. Then we got back to the Southwest in '82, where I've been at Arizona State for 25 years, and I retired in 2005. But I'm on the emeritus faculty, so I continue to write, continue to do my thing. I shared an office with Bob Pangrazi for 25 years, and he and I did a lot of fitness-related research over the years.
I must say, Arizona State certainly had a lot of outstanding academicians, and what, James Skinner was there for a long while.
Yeah, right? It was a very interesting thing because actually my associate dean at Kansas State was a guy named Paige Mulholland. You probably might remember him actually from your time at Kansas State, but he then became the dean at Oklahoma, and then ultimately moved to Arizona State as the provost, academic vice president, and he was in my faculty fitness program at Kansas State University. He, along with the dean Bill Stamey, as well as a lot of other administrators, and I started that program there, and it did well by us as a department. And when Page moved on, he was committed to the importance of physical education. He saw an opportunity to make a department kind of a premier one, and so they already had very good faculty, and Pangrazi and Chris Wells and Bill Stone and others. And so they brought in 3 people, Dan Landers, Jim Skinner, and me, as target of opportunity hires to get that program kick-started. And Gary Cranbeal was already there, and then ultimately George Stelmach and others. And so, we had a lot of academy members. Jerry Thomas later came on board. So we had a lot of academy members, and I think that Paige Mulholland had a lot to do with that.
So you're really happy, looking back, you're really happy that you had an opportunity to head back to the Southwest.
Yeah. I mean, we always wanted to be in the Southwest, and I knew I didn't want to go back to New Mexico as much as I loved it, because I just never thought it was a good idea to come in as a junior faculty member to work with people who are one-time your professors. They always see you as a student. And, if you're going to be effective, you've got to be able to do your own thing. And Arizona State was just a great thing, and we're here, we're retired, and our kids did their high school here, and it's been very, very good for us.
Fantastic. Of your many publications, I've published extensively, which ones are you most proud of, and why?
Well, I think probably most people would look to their research and try to identify a landmark publication. But to be just downright honest, that it was called Concepts of Physical Education then, that we did at Texas A&M. We published it in '68, which is the same year that Ken Cooper published aerobics. I got to know him over the years, and I think that we were on the front end of the active lifestyle movement. We just didn't know it at the time,
Right.
And I was out trying to get people to consider changing from the skills-only approach in the college to a conceptual approach. And, of course, publishers didn't want to publish a book. So we actually paid for that first book to be done. Actually, we didn't pay money. We put up a guarantee that if it didn't sell, we'd pay for it. Fortunately, it did, and so I did a lot of talks at the National College Physical Education for Men, AFER, trying to get people interested in. And now most every school in the country, while not required, has a fitness and wellness conceptual class, and there are at least 50 or more books that compete with ours. But I'm very proud of that, and I would also say the Fitness for Life book, which is a high school equivalent that we did in '79. Ruth Lindsay was a co-author, and later on Greg and Karen Welk, and I'm pleased to say that our youngest son, Will, does the stress management, drugs, alcohol, and tobacco chapter, so it's kind of nice to have him
Sure.
be a co-author.
Sure. Are you still continuing to write quite a bit, Chuck?
Yeah, actually, we just came out with a Fitness for Life elementary school program. We did a middle school program earlier, and I'm still an author on the books. I actually still do some research, and it's interesting when you ask about one publication. My first research quarterly publication with Phil Pletcher in 1968 was called Diet and Physical Activity of Obese and Non-Obese Children.
Interesting.
So I guess maybe we were out in front. Over the years, I've done a few other things on conceptual physical education. I guess I'm particularly proud of the studies that we did in our Project Active Teen, where we followed kids for 10 years in a high school and tested the effectiveness of conceptual physical education. Those were published in 1998 and 2000 in Pediatric Exercise Science and Research Quarterly. And I think also the study that Bob and Pangrazi and I did in Research Quarterly, Are American Children Physically Fit?
Yes.
Where we challenged some of the traditional notions about awards and normative standards and things like that.
You are also somebody who has, it's interesting, has certainly published many single-authored kinds of things, but you've also collaborated with a variety of different people. Haven't you collaborated, but not just with colleagues, but haven't you done quite a bit of collaboration with former students of yours?
Yes, and I think, for example, Greg Welk is a former doctoral student. He's at Iowa State. He's now one of the co-authors of Concepts of Physical Fitness, but he and I have stayed in touch. Guy Lemesurier, who's up in Canada, and several of my students, especially Ken Fox, for example.
Yes.
He published in the Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology the Physical Self-Perception Profile in 1988, which was actually his dissertation. And I mean, that's widely cited as a physical self-perception measures. And so I'm proud of my former doctoral students, and now I guess they're my grad children. They're doctoral students who are coming out and doing a lot of good things.
Isn't Brad Cardinal one of your former students?
No, he's not a former student. He's just a guy that has similar interests, and we have done so many things together over the year. One of the publications I'm very proud of is one that he and I did on the history of conceptual physical education in Quest.
Absolutely.
That just came out recently, but he and I have collaborated on a lot of projects, and just sometimes in your career you connect with somebody who has similar beliefs, and kind of we really write well together. And we got another project that we're working on right now, as a matter of fact.
Oh, good. What is that, Chuck?
We're tracing the history of the high school conceptual physical education movement.
Oh, very nice.
It's going to be kind of like a parallel historical paper to the one that we did for Quest, but with at the high school level, and tracing that from the 70s up to the present.
Oh, very, very nice. What I'm interested in knowing, what do you consider the key events in kinesiology over the last 40 years or so?
Well, that's a timely question for me right now, because I did the McCloy lecture at the AVERT convention this year in San Diego, and I just finished writing up the McCloy lecture for the Research Quarterly, and it'll be coming out sometime soon. But I chose to take a historical view of the fitness and activity movement from my entry in the 60s and actually went back a little bit ahead of that. So if anybody really wants to see what I think are some of the real landmarks, they could take a look at that. But you know, I could tick off quickly 4 or 5 things that I think were key events. And you know, a lot of people talk about Franklin Henry and the academic discipline. Well, actually, the Big Ten Body of Knowledge project was huge in terms of building a body of knowledge. And Conant's, in his books, criticism of the graduate programs in physical education were instrumental. And I think the Big Ten project really provided the groundwork for the comments that Franklin Henry made. I think that the civil rights movement, the women's movement, you know, and Title IX certainly had a huge influence on me. I did a whole series of research studies after I did that. I went to Penn State, did a sabbatical with Dan Landers, and I came back and did a whole series of studies related to self-confidence of women in sports, and certainly the fact that I was the de facto athletic director for women greatly influenced that. Even things like institutional review boards had an influence. My study was the first study to ever be reviewed at Texas A&M, and we were just telemetering heart rates of kids doing what kids do. And because they were so conservative, we were told that we had to stop kids when their heart rates got to 170 beats. If you did that, kids couldn't play, you know.
Absolutely.
But it's like word processors and desktop computers and the internet all greatly influenced I mean, when I was in school, I hate to be the Abe Lincoln walked 20 miles to school guy, but when you went to the library, the stacks were closed. You had to order a book. They'd go up the stacks journal and they'd bring it down because there were no copiers to copy the things. You had to make note cards, and oftentimes you go to a journal and the article would be gone. Somebody razor bladed it out so that they could have it, and you couldn't get it. So, I mean, all of those things really made a difference. I think another thing that made a big difference in my life was early on in my undergraduate career, reading the report that shocked the president in Sports Illustrated. We were assigned that. It was written by Boyle in 1955 as a result of the Krauss-Weber studies, which were really not very well done if you look back retrospectively. But it got me interested in fitness, and I said, this is a big deal.
What are you pleased with the direction of? This is going to be a very broad question, but are you pleased with the direction that kinesiology is taking in terms of higher education? I mean,
I told myself when I was an administrator that I wasn't going to be one of those guys that ended up at the end of his career bitter, because everything's a moving target. Everything changes, What you sign on for when you start is not what you're going to be doing, 20, 30, 40 years later. So you have to recognize that things are going to change. I was fortunate when I started out, any publication counted, to get promoted for a professional article, books counted, and some of that has changed. By and large, I'm really pleased with the health fitness movement, the fact that we've moved from skill-related fitness to health-related fitness, and I'm very pleased with the development of epidemiology, and started with Morris and Paffenbarger and then Blair, and how this has led to the development of activity guidelines and the importance of healthy lifestyles and the recognition that activity is important, and even now activity-centered physical education. I guess on the other side of the coin, I am saddened, I guess I would say, by the fact that the specialization movement has caused kind of a rift between the professional side and the discipline side. I do think I've seen in the last 10 years more of a movement towards support, and maybe part of that is because a lot of the units in universities are separate now, and there seems to be more collegiality among separate units than there was when they were together.
Right, right. I'm also curious as to, just as a follow-up to that last question about the academic preparation of kinesiologists now, are you pleased with that? I know that you've been officially retired since 2005, but are you pleased with the academic preparation for kinesiologists?
Well, when I went to A&M, there really weren't, the textbooks didn't really come out for specialized courses except for exercise physiology and kinesiology, biomechanics, sociology of sport, well, history, of course, and philosophy were there, but a lot of the other specialization areas, those books really weren't published until the 60s and 70s. Right. And so in that context, I published a motor development book in the early 70s. But in answer directly to your question, as those courses evolved, I was right in the thick of helping Texas A&M. I developed their first exercise physiology lab, and I'm not an exercise physiologist.
Right.
But we had to have it, and at Kansas State, I helped redesign the whole curriculum so that we built a body of knowledge core, a disciplinary core, and brought in young faculty members to teach those kind of classes. I do think that at times we've tended to drift to the point where the disciplinarians care more about their discipline than they do about the needs of the professionals, such as teachers. Right. And they teach courses at a level that is not appropriate for, delivery. And so I think that what we have to do is we have to, as disciplinarians, we have to recognize that we're going to have some people who study the discipline and they need to approach some of these things slightly differently than the way people need to study them who are going to go out and be the professionals, the fitness leaders, the physical educators, the coaches, and that there is a different application of the discipline. It doesn't mean that we want to know as much about the discipline as possible. We need to deliver to these professionals the discipline in a way that they can use it. Right.
Kind of bridging the gap between research and practice.
Right, and I think that sometimes, again, I think we, especially through the 80s and 90s, I think we had this movement away where the discipline was moving one way and the professions were moving the other way, and there was some antagonism between the two sides, and I hope that we get closer together on that.
Now, you mentioned that you're still engaged in your writing projects, et cetera, but I'm curious, what else have you been doing in retirement, and what would you like to accomplish that you haven't been able to accomplish? Is there anything?
Well, actually, a couple of things that come to mind is, I was when the President's Council and AFERD and the FitnessGram kind of thing happened in the late 80s. The AFERD Youth Fitness Test was a skills-based test, and AFERD had also developed a health-related test, and so I was on a committee that was charged with getting together and deciding with the President's Council what we were going to do. And I got a little dog barking in the background here. Anyway, to make a long story short, the President's Council basically preempted AFERD and others. All they had as an award at the time, and they took over the youth fitness test. And so I went to work with FitnessGram, and we developed FitnessGram, a health-related fitness test with people like Russ Pate, Sharon Plowman, Steve Blair, Kirk Cure, Tim Lohman, and others, and Charles Sterling, Mary Lou Meredith. And so I worked on that FitnessGram advisory board for years, and I've since retired. It's time for younger people to move on. But I do think it's important for us at some point to come up with one youth fitness test that everybody can buy in on,
right,
and get rid of these awards that are based on normative standards that don't help kids in any way. And so I'm still working on that. I'm working on an Institute of Medicine committee right now. I have worked with the President's Council and Chris Spain, and we were fortunate to re-up the Research Digest in the 1990s that Harrison Clark from Oregon had started back in the 70s, and so I'm proud of that. But right now I'm working on some historical things. I'm revising my college book. I'm revising my high school book, and I'm out talking to people about the elementary program, which is basically a video-based thing to try to get kids active in the classroom. But that's a little bit harder thing to get people to buy in on, because we don't have access to classroom teachers like we do PE teachers. So I'm keeping busy.
Now, are you traveling and giving presentations still quite a bit? Are you?
I am. I don't fly as much. I've always had low blood pressure my whole life, and it's trying to give me a little bit of trouble when I fly long distances. So I have to be careful in how much long distance flying I do. Yeah, but I do 4 or 5 presentations a year when I'm able to get there, and I like keeping my hand in. I still go in, and I'm emeritus in the Emeritus College here at Arizona State University, so I teach classes for people when they're out of town and that kind of thing. But the workshops, I do a lot of workshops, been doing them locally, trying to help teachers implement activity in the classroom as well as physical education. So yeah, I like to keep going.
Good. And are you? I'm sure you're remaining physically active. Are you walking, running, playing basketball?
I am. Because of some deteriorated discs, I had to give up that full court basketball. It was a tough day of my life, I'll have to tell you that. But I do a lot of walking. I do my resistance and flexibility exercises, very, very faithfully core exercises. And I've actually taken up golf, which I never had time for, never really played when I was working, and with a kind of a limited backswing, I'm not going to be Arnold Palmer, but I'm not afraid to go out and play with people I don't know.
Well, you're living in a perfect location to play golf, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's a little hot. It was 100+ degrees yesterday when I played, but in the wintertime, it's beautiful.
Absolutely. Chuck, anything else you would like to mention or discuss?
No, other than to just once again say how much anybody who's accomplished what I've accomplished could not have done it without my wife Kathy and the support of my kids. I would mention that if anybody wants to look at other things that I think are influential, that article that I just did for the McCloy Lecture and Research Quarterly kind of summarizes those. But in there, I thank my kids for putting up with Dad sitting at the dining room table in Manhattan, Kansas, writing books when he should have probably been out, working with the kids. But built them a nice backyard there for them to play in, and we did a lot of stuff together too. But their support and the support of my colleagues and my graduate students, and that helps you do what you do.
Absolutely. Well, Chuck, listen, thanks. I won't keep you any longer, but thanks for your time. And this has been fun. I really, really appreciate you talking with me this morning.
Well, thanks. And I remember our times back at Kansas State in the olden days.
Absolutely. It seems it's been a while now, but I think about Kansas State still quite a bit. It was a great initial position, professional position for me, and it was a nice opportunity to get to know you. And thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you for the interview. I appreciate it.
All right, Chuck. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, bye.